Once you've installed ISA Server 2006, the next thing you're going to want to do is to open it up a little. That's right, you heard me correctly. This is a firewall, I know that, but when we first install ISA Server 2006, the default behavior is to deny access to everything. Now you did hear me right there, deny everything. So this means if you've just thrown ISA Server into your network, you might be experiencing a sudden spike in help desk calls right now because ISA Server will prevent everyone from getting out onto the internet. Now that's great as far as locking down ISA goes. You can't get much better security than that, but I don't think your users on your network are going to be all that impressed. So let's fix the problem. In fact, we actually have two problems here. The first is that our users, they won't be able to access the internet. The second is that we won't be able to access the internet from the ISA server itself. Now, although they sound like the same problem, the truth is, if you tune the ISA server to allow users to get out onto the internet, the ISA server itself will still be off limits until you specifically allow that as well. So here we are, we're on our ISA server's desktop, so we'll go and click on Start. We'll choose All Programs, Microsoft ISA Server, and we'll launch the ISA Server Management Console. Now, I will point out that in order to manage ISA Server, you will need to be logged on with either a local administrator's account or an account that's a member of the Domain Administrators group if you're using ISA Server in a domain. Although in a future video, we're going to talk about how to use administrative roles to delegate administration to other users. Now, by the way, a little side issue here. If you're planning on using terminal services or a remote desktop to manage your ISA server from your local workstation, you'll be in for a shock because, by default, the ISA server will deny you the ability to connect. So while we're here logged on locally, let's first set it up so that we're able to remote this server. Now, I've got a Vista machine on this internal network and it has an IP address of 10.32.0.20. So let's open up a command prompt and try to ping 10.32.0.20. And you can see that we can in fact ping the Vista workstation from our ISA server just fine. Well, I've just switched over to the Windows Vista workstation now, the one that we just pinged, and let's go and open up a command prompt on this machine, and we'll try and ping our ISA server, which is simply LA ISA. And as you can see, it doesn't respond. Now that's another one of the default behaviors of ISA Server 2006. By default, it will not respond to any pings. So let's try and remote desktop this ISA server anyway. We'll click on Start. We'll choose All Programs. We'll go to Accessories and we'll open up Remote Desktop. And we'll try and contact our LA ISA server and we'll hit Connect. And as you can see, nothing's happening. The ISA server is denying our ability to connect to it. So I've just switched back to our ISA server here, so let's go to our management console, and on the left-hand side here, we're going to expand arrays, and then we'll expand our ISA server, which has the hostname LA ISA. Now we'll select Firewall Policy, and over here in the right-hand side of our console, we're going to choose this hyperlink here to edit the system policy. Now under our Remote Management heading, we'll select Terminal Server, as of course Remote Desktop uses the Terminal Service Protocol RDP, and you can see here that it is enabled, but if we go to the From tab, this will list a couple of groups in here, the Enterprise Remote Management Computers group and the Remote Management Computers group. Now these groups aren't typical Windows groups like you'd see in Active Directory, these are just internal to ISA Server. So if we highlight one of these and click Edit, you can see that there's no computers here currently defined, just the interfaces for the ISA server itself. So we'll need to define which computers are able to access this ISA server by clicking on the Add button, and we'll want to add in a computer. Then we'll enter in the name of the computer, which for our Vista machine is simply called LA Desk 01V for Vista, and has the IP address of 10.32.0.20, and we'll click OK. and we'll click OK again, and one more time. Now finally, you'll notice at the top of this console, we'll need to click the Apply button to apply the changes that we just made. Now, for any reason we do want to back out of this change, then we can just click Discard. So we'll click Apply. Our configuration has been saved. We'll click OK. And now we'll go back to our Vista workstation and see if we can connect. Alright, well, I've just switched back here to our Vista workstation, so we can see where we left off before. So let's try that again. We'll hit connect. Alright, well, it's looking good here. We can actually get some response from this machine, and there you go. You can see that we can now connect to our ISA server using remote desktop. Alright, so that was pretty easy, but it was an important step for us to be able to remote desktop our ISA server. However, I will point out one minor difference to this rule. When we installed ISA server the first time, had we have chosen to install it over a remote desktop connection, then this step would have already been configured for us, but only for the workstation we were connecting from. So if you need to provide remote management access for other administrators, that's how you configure it. Okay, while we're here on our Vista machine, let's try and open up a copy of Internet Explorer. And we're going to try and go out to our default website, which I've currently got set to Google, but you'll notice that it can't go out into the internet. And that's because our ISA server is denying all access to the external network. Again, that's the default behavior of ISA server. Deny everything. Right, I've just switched back to our ISA server. So to allow our internal clients the ability to get out onto the internet, we'll need to come back here into our firewall policy. And in the middle of the console here, we'll be able to see all of the system policy rules that have been created by default when we installed the product. And you'll note that we can only see one here for the moment. So if on the right we come over and click Show System Policy Rules. All right, here we can see we've got a whole bunch of different policy rules there. But this default rule you can see at the bottom here, its job is to deny everything. So taking a closer look at our last default rule here, in fact, let's just hide these system policy rules for now. You can see that this rule's behavior is set to deny all traffic coming from all networks, let's just scroll over, going to all networks, and to apply this rule to all users. So good luck trying to get out on the internet with that rule in place. Basically, it's saying deny everyone from anywhere with no exceptions. So you, my friend, you're not going anywhere. So to fix this, we'll need to create a new rule. So in the right-hand side of our console here, we're going to click Create an Access Rule, because we'll need to now explicitly allow users to connect through our ISA server so they're able to access the internet. Now, of course, clicking this has just started up a new wizard where the first thing we'll need to do is provide a name for this rule. So I'm going to call this one Allow Internet Access, and we'll click Next. Now, when this rule is activated, do we want to allow traffic through or deny it? Well, we're already denying it, aren't we? So we'll choose Allow, and we'll click Next. All right, here we can set what sort of protocols this rule is going to apply to. Now, the default is to apply this rule to only selected protocols. But we could change this to all outbound traffic, which is very unlikely. You're going to want to select that one. Or we could choose to set it to all outbound traffic except whatever we define down here. Now, we're going to leave the default at selected protocols, and we can then choose which protocol it is that we want to allow access to. So we'll click the Add button, and we're going to expand Web because we're interested in Internet access here, and we'll choose HTTP for our Internet access example here. We'll click Add, and we can see that's been added to this window behind this one. Now, you're also likely to want to add in some other protocols as well, although HTTP is probably going to suffice for our example here, but you still might want to select something like HTTPS and click Add on that, or even maybe FTP as well, depending on your needs. Although I'm going to leave it at these two here, so we'll click close. In fact, no we won't. I'm also going to add in another one. Let's expand infrastructure, and I'm going to add in DNS as well, because no doubt we're going to want to do DNS lookups as well. So we're going to add that in. We'll click add. Now we'll click close, and we've got our three protocols there, DNS, HTTP, and HTTPS. That's fine. We'll click next. Now we'll need to define where the traffic matching this rule is going to be coming from. That's going to be our internal production network, of course. These are our users inside our network that want to get out to the internet. So we'll click add. Now we'll expand networks, and we'll select the internal network, which you might recall, we defined this internal network when we installed ISIS server. This was one of the choices in the installation wizard. So internal here is pointing to the network adapter we said was facing our internal network in the installation wizard. So we're going to be selecting this one. We'll click add, then we'll click close. Now we'll click next. And which destination will this traffic apply to? Well, that's easy. That'll be the internet, of course. So again, we'll click add. We'll expand networks, and we'll choose the opposite of our internal network. That'll be the external network. We'll click add and then close. Okay, good. We're now allowing, as part of this rule, all traffic from our internal network to the external network. So we'll click next. And our final step here is to choose to whom our new firewall rule is going to apply to. And this defaults to all users. So we'll leave that as it is. We'll click next, and then we'll click finish. All right, well, there's our new rule, which we'll need, of course, to apply it to our server to become active. So we'll click apply, and this is going to change our running ISIS server configuration to include this new rule. But bear in mind, though, we haven't opened up ISIS server to the rest of the internet. ISIS server itself is still secure, and it's still denying access from the external internet. We've only allowed users from our internal network to get out of our network and onto the internet. All right, well, our configuration has changed here. We've saved it. We'll click OK. So now that that rule is live and in effect, let's go back to our Windows Vista workstation, and let's see if we can now access the internet. Right, I've just switched back to our Windows Vista workstation, so we'll try and refresh Internet Explorer again. And obviously, since this is a new machine here, it's going to want to do that run once thing. But you can see straight away, look, it's got out onto MSN. So obviously, internet access is now working as intended. It was pretty simple to get it working, really, but we needed to do it because the default configuration of ISIS server, as you've seen, is set to deny everything. So we've just unlocked one small piece of the puzzle. Now do bear in mind though, we only just allowed HTTP and HTTPS traffic out from our internal network to get to the internet. But I should point out that by default, your ISIS server itself still doesn't have the ability to access the internet. So if we go and open up a copy of Internet Explorer, and let's go and try and get to Google. You'll see straight away here that we've just been popped up with a 403 error, and we can see that we've been blocked by the ISIS server. It's the ISIS server system policy that has prevented us from getting out on the internet. In fact, the only URLs that we're allowed to get to by default are Microsoft's own sites, and there's a good reason for that. If we go and click on our firewall policy again, and over on the right-hand side here in our tasks pane, we'll choose to show that system policy rules again. This is going to give us, obviously, a big list here of system rules right smack bang in the middle of the console. Now, it's these rules which basically serve as baseline rules to ensure that the ISIS server is able to do its job. So if we scroll down a bit here and take a look at rule number 26, if I'm not mistaken, let's just double-click on this one here. And we'll click on the To tab, and we'll select System Policy Allowed Sites, and we'll click Edit. You can see here that Microsoft.com, Windows.com, and Windows Update, they're the only allowed sites that our ISIS server itself can access. But why only those? Well, firstly, because the general rule of thumb is that you shouldn't be using your firewall to browse the internet for a start, or any server for that matter. Secondly, to keep this server up to date with bug fixes and patches and so forth, you'll probably need to visit Windows Update to download the latest software. So if we go and click on Start, All Programs, and we'll select Windows Update, you can see that we can in fact get out onto the internet, but to these sites only. If we go and try to get back to Google, you can see that we're denied. Now, even though we can get out to Windows Update from our ISA server, depending on your corporate policy and how you decide to handle updates, you may prefer to point your ISA server to a Windows Software Update Services server elsewhere on your network, rather than update it directly via Windows Update. But I wanted to show you this since it's important to understand why internet access isn't working on your ISA server by default, and of equal importance, why you probably shouldn't be allowing that behavior anyway. But there's always one person that wants to be able to access the net from the ISA server, so here's how you do it should you be that person. So let's just minimize this and we'll cancel out of this right now. And I'm going to choose to hide our system policy rules just so this window here is a little less cluttered. Alright, now there's a couple of ways that we could do this. We could just edit the existing rule here that we just created, or we could create a new one. So let's just go and create a new rule here. We'll click on Create Access Rule. I'll give this one a name of Allow ISA Server Internet Access. Alright, we'll click Next. Now when this rule is activated, do we want to allow traffic or deny it? Well, we're already denying it, so we'll choose Allow. We'll click Next. Now here we can set what sort of protocols this rule will apply to. The default is to apply to only selected protocols, and that's good. We don't want to apply to everything. We'll click Add. Like before, we'll expand Web. We'll choose HTTP. We'll click Add. Let's also add in HTTPS and click Add, and then we'll click Close. We'll click Next. Now we'll need to define where the traffic matching this rule will be originating from. Well, that's going to be our ISA server, of course, so we'll click Add. We'll expand Networks. And in here, there's already a default object defined for the ISA server itself, and it's this one, localhost. So we're going to select that, localhost. We'll click Add, then we'll click Close, and then we'll click Next. Alright, so which destination will this traffic be applying to? The internet, of course. Again, we'll click Add. We'll expand Networks. We'll choose External. We'll click Add, Close, and then Next. And the last step is to choose to whom our new firewall rule will apply to. And again, this defaults to all users, so we'll leave that as it is. We'll click Next, and then we'll click Finish. Alright, well, there's our new rule here, and again, we're going to need to apply this to our ISA server for it to become active. So up the top, we'll click Apply, and it's going to change our running ISA server configuration to include our new rule. And then we'll click OK. Okay, now that our rule's been applied, now let's test it. Let's go back to Internet Explorer, and we'll try and refresh the page. And this time we have liftoff. There you go, internet access from the ISA server itself. Now, for what it's worth, I am not a fan of accessing the internet from my servers, but there you have it. You can do it if you need to. In this video, we've taken a look at some of the initial tasks you'll need to perform once you've installed your ISA server, specifically focusing on allowing internet access and remote desktop access. So now you should know how to grant your production network, your internal network, access to the internet by creating a firewall policy rule, and you also saw how to extend that permission to the ISA server itself should you decide that. Now you also learned how you can edit the system policy to allow access to the ISA server remotely using Remote Desktop. So we hope you've enjoyed this video and would like to thank you for watching.